Hello, dreamers. Happy Monday. It is March 9th, 2026. And welcome to this short bonus of Killafornia Dreaming. I'm your host, Roseanne. This is more of a breaking news and current events type of episode because the investigation is still ongoing as of this recording. So there isn't really enough information for this to be a full hour plus long episode. Before we get into today's story, I have a few notes about this show. We are still an independent ad-free podcast that is fully listener funded and listener supported in more ways than one. And I want to thank you all so much for all of your sweet comments and all of your support on the posts that I made dealing with that online bullying that I've been confronted with at this point in my life, because that's something that I totally needed right now. But anyway, please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, all of the social medias. You can leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platforms you listen to your shows on. I'm getting some good traction on YouTube and on Spotify. So if those are your favorite platforms, subscribe over there. If you want to become a part of the team and you have $1 or $2 to spare each month, you may enjoy the dozens and dozens of episodes I have on Patreon that you won't hear anywhere else. We are coming up this June on 9 years of content creating, so you can imagine that there is tons and tons of stuff for you to binge if you've never listened to this show before. So let's get started with this very intriguing case. We are going to discuss the February 1st, 2026 disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, mother of today's show host, Savannah Guthrie. I was driving home from California on February 1st when this case first hit the news. The story is out of the state of Arizona and involves a pretty high-profile individual. As many of you, if not all of you, have already heard, the victim or the missing person is 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. She resides in Catalina Springs, just outside of Tucson. A missing persons report was filed that day, February 1st. And here we are a month and a week later, and Nancy still has not been seen or heard from since. Authorities in Pima County have indicated that based on the evidence found in and around Nancy's house, they believe her to have been forcibly taken from her home, and this quickly turned from being a missing persons case into an abduction case and possibly in what we suspect to be a abduction for ransom case. So I was following the story for the first couple of weeks, but the longer this abduction went on, with each passing day, it was almost not even really worth following and Googling first thing in the morning, checking your streams, because of all of the misinformation, the false leads, rumors of these ransom notes being unrelated or coming from people unrelated to this case. So that's when I start to lose interest in stories like this. I'm kind of like the public in general, where we just jump from one story to the next to the next. But when something big develops, you know I'm going to come back to it and bring you the whole story, especially if this ever makes its way through the court system. I'm pretty pessimistic about this sort of stuff. Like, remember the whole Gabby Petito thing and looking for her? I didn't think there was going to be a happy ending to that story at all. Same thing with the submarine people that got imploded. I'm just not the most optimistic person in the world, you know? And I usually wait around for an arrest to even talk about breaking news. And even more so, I wait for a trial to be done before I do a full-blown episode. That's usually when I become interested again, when there's an arrest and then it dies down again while the process moves into trial. And then, I like getting that probable cause affidavit if they are releasing information, but sometimes when a case is high profile like this, they just don't. But usually we'll be able to get an idea of what types of evidence has been discovered and what led to the probable cause affidavit to be drafted in the first place, and ultimately a suspect taken into custody. However, this case is still very much open and active, of course, since Nancy has not been recovered as I'm writing and recording this. That might change by the time, this gets uploaded, which is going to be today if all goes well. But it still doesn't bring about answers to where in the world is Nancy at right now. It's anybody's guess. And it's these mysteries, these types of unanswered questions. Those are the reasons why I even began a podcast in the first place, because I want to know everything about a case, and I want to know the truth, and I want to know, other people's truths. Like, I want to hear different sides of a story. In situations like this, and really most crimes that we never really get the whole truth from the suspects. So we lean on law enforcement to do their job and to bring a accurate and comprehensive case to the table, So I often wait until after the trial, and not that the trial is always the truth, but at least it brings us a little bit closer, and the defendant has a chance to defend themselves if they want to. So if the prosecutor is getting up there and spewing a whole bunch of lies, well, then they can get up there and dispute it if they want to. They want to go toe to toe with the prosecutor. Personally, I wouldn't, but if somebody was up there telling lies about me, I'd probably want to. The news cycle is definitely slowing down on a case like this, so I wanted to just put out my own episode real quick. I did something totally lame. I started to research a story for episode number 327, and I suddenly realized that, I didn't suddenly realize. I happened upon my own episode, and I already covered this case like 3 years ago. So that kind of screwed me up. I was going to put this out and that out right after, but I had to scrap that. And then suddenly it caused me to have some sort of like block. I couldn't come up with a story, but eventually I did come up with one. And even though it's a sad story and it's a heartbreaking story, it's also something that I think that I can make light of in terms of the actual perpetrator of the crime in that case. He's kind of a goober, and I'm going to make fun of him, I think. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how the tone of the whole thing goes. My jokes are kind of off the cuff, so I can't sit here and plan them out. And also it depends on my mood as well. I had started actually recording this episode over the weekend, but I kind of had a little bit of a mild headache over the weekend, and I just couldn't do it. And I got 12 minutes in, and I was like, I just can't. So I went to lay down and I put it on the shelf until today. When I got back and listened to myself, I was like, God, I sound awful. I sounded like I was on my deathbed. And it was just a little headache. So I decided to start over, and here we are. Let's get back to it. That's enough of the backstory on getting this episode out. Jeez. This case involving Nancy Guthrie, it is a rare thing nowadays, this whole kidnapping for ransom thing. It's become obsolete since technology is so advanced, but I guess that there's different ways to go about it because technology has advanced. But it is virtually impossible nowadays to cover all of your tracks. I mean, they seem to be doing a pretty good job in this case, because if they weren't able to cover their tracks that well, they'd probably be caught by now. So far, they're winning at this cat and mouse game as far as we know. Who knows? The FBI could be parked in front of their house as we speak, and we have no idea, right? So basically, what I found is the best way to get away with things in this new world of leaving your digital footprint everywhere is to really not have a cell phone for a really long time prior to the crime. Don't have an affair. Don't play any shady financial games. Don't buy a bunch of life insurance on your victim. Stay away from the Home Depots and the Lowe's and the Ace Hardwares, because we know what you're getting. It's called a murder kit. And if you're taken into custody, suspected of doing something, plead the fifth, shut your mouth, and get your attorney. But this story today has gone on way longer than I actually thought it would when the news first broke. I did not think we would be sitting here 5 weeks later, still no closer to knowing anything about anything. So there are several agencies that have become involved in the investigation into Nancy's abduction, with the Pima County Sheriff's Department is in the lead when it comes to this investigation. The FBI became involved along with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Various search and rescue teams are also involved. All of the evidence that was collected has been or will be subjected to forensic lab analysis. I'm sure they're finding DNA and tracking down by way of, CODIS or genealogical connections. They're doing door-to-door, building-to-building canvassing of any surveillance cameras that may have captured anything that could help lead to clues as to what could have happened to Nancy and where she might be. One of the more troubling details that came out when this whole thing started is that there were blood droplets found on the tiles on the front porch walkway of Nancy's house. And, it wasn't even authorities that found it. It was a journalist. They had actually released Nancy's home back to the family very shortly after she went missing, which is, I believe they've said, I don't know if they've full on admitted, I think they have, maybe some sources close to the case have said that that was a big mistake. That blood was swabbed and it was a match to Nancy's DNA. You see, what happened was a journalist, after the house was released, went up to the front door and he was the one that spotted the blood, if I'm not mistaken. And it did turn out to be Nancy's. There have been numerous ransom demands, I believe, made via some electronic means, maybe email, and the payments for that ransom to be made in the form of cryptocurrency, along with a couple of deadlines. I believe there have only been 2 deadlines, and both of which came and went, and there was still nothing that we know of that's getting anybody any closer to finding Nancy. There's also not been any proof of life given to authorities, investigators, or the family. Video from Nancy's Ring doorbell was released to the media. I think that came out about 2 weeks after this whole thing started, maybe 10 or 12 days. It's a very eerie looking video. It's this guy who walked up to Nancy's porch and was messing around with her doorbell. Many of you have probably seen the video or have seen still shots, and some of those still shots point out and label certain things that are critical pieces of evidence and possibly identifiable things that this person had on them in these images. The following information is from a February 26 Newsweek article written by Khalida Rahman. And this wasn't an article that was about the video. It was sort of a little bit of a follow-up to the video and some reaction. If you're following this case, like I've said, you've probably seen the footage. I saw it, but up until I started doing this episode, I didn't really sit there and frame by frame examine the images for any details. But this article said that there was an FBI agent who noticed a detail in the video footage that was apparently overlooked, because they could see that this person had on maybe a ski mask, this person had on a backpack that had some reflective patches, and this person was also having on them or somewhere on them like a holster, like a gun holster. So if this agent is correct, nobody pointed out the fact that this agent, former agent, noticed a very important detail. But this agent said that the person in the video had a walkie-talkie in his hand. This man is now known, the man at Nancy's doorbell, he's now known as Porch Guy. And the former agent said that this means whoever it was that was captured on that video on her porch had at least one accomplice, possibly more, and that generally speaking, there is probably no way that this abduction was pulled off by one person. This agent apparently spotted the antenna of that possible walkie-talkie that the person had in their hand that nobody seemed to notice or mention. And I don't think that there was anything ever spoken or said in the video, and this person didn't use the walkie-talkie, if it was indeed a walkie-talkie in this person's hand. The investigative agencies have said that they were aware of the differences that people are seeing in the videos and the various still images, with the most noticeable difference being the person having a backpack and then not having a backpack. There are also reports that the man captured on Nancy's doorbell was spotted at her house on an earlier day, but there aren't any date or timestamps attached to these images, and the sheriff has said that, like much of what's out there, the notion that the various pictures were taken on different days is only conjecture, but it's been suggested to not be so quick to rule out an accomplice. If they look like they're wearing the same clothing, it is common for people who set out to carry a serious crime out that requires accomplices and they're doing this together. Oftentimes they dress very similarly. The person in the video was wearing a ski mask, pants, a jacket. He had on gloves and he had a handgun holster. He's estimated to be around 5 foot 10 inches tall and have an average build. And then this Newsweek article went on to review the beginnings of this case and how there's been growing concern over Nancy being gone for so long without access to daily medications that are essential for her well-being. In other words, Nancy needs her medications to survive. She has a pacemaker. Nancy's family, mainly her 3 children, have been active on social media sporadically throughout the last 5 weeks, and they've been making public appeals for Nancy to be brought home safely. I'll go through the various video posts that they've made in the days and weeks following Nancy's disappearance, but let me tell you a little bit more about Nancy herself. She was 84 years old at the time of her disappearance, born January 27th, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She ended up moving to Tucson in the early 1970s with her family and has been there ever since. Her husband, Charles Guthrie, was married to Nancy until he unexpectedly died on a mining expedition in Mexico in 1988. Together, Nancy and Charles had 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. Savannah is the most high-profile member of the Guthrie family, as she is the Emmy-winning host of the long-standing morning show here in the United States, The Today Show. I've never really been in a place in my life where I was regularly home from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. when The Today Show airs on NBC, but I am aware of the evolution of the various hosts that have come and gone over the years, mainly the controversial ones, but that's another topic for another day. The Today Show, which made its debut on January 14th, 1952, has this 3-4 hour long format, and at the top of the hour they have different hosts, and I guess your hierarchy depends on your time slot. Like Savannah is at the 7 a.m. time slot, I believe, and as far as I can tell, the way that things go and your seniority or rankings, I guess is a word for it. I don't really hierarchy. I already used that word, and I try not to be too redundant, but I know I can be. That's why I always am looking at a thesaurus. So as for Savannah, she was born December 27th, 1971, and has been the main co-anchor since July of 2012 after working in broadcast journalism in various other capacities since 2007 when she first joined NBC. Savannah has not been on the air since her mom disappeared, but I did watch a couple of videos on the morning that I was finishing up writing this, which was, I believe I did this Friday or Saturday morning. Like I said, I was trying to record it. I finished it, and then I really couldn't really get through it because just my head. I have to be in a good headspace, and I have to be well rested. Otherwise, I sound like death warmed over. But like I said, I did watch a couple of the most recent videos that are out there and updates. I was getting about to the 4th week or into the 5th week of Nancy's disappearance when I was finishing this. And it's been reported that Savannah does intend to return to her place as co-anchor on the Today Show. She was slated to be broadcasting from this year's Winter Olympics, but with this whole thing going on involving her mom, just happened just as she was about to set off for Italy. She ended up being replaced by longtime Olympic correspondent and former pro tennis player Mary Carrillo. Savannah has been a well-liked and popular anchor on the long-running morning show. And the fact that she is so well known, I mean, we can consider her a celebrity. Journalists don't like to be thought of as celebrities. Well, they say that, but I think they kind of do. But they are celebrities. We know them. You let them into your living rooms every morning on these morning talk shows, right? This is why this case has been having us all riveted to our news streams and our social media looking for updates. And while attention to this kidnapping is important, in getting the media coverage and getting regular updates is crucial, it has led to a great deal of confusion and skepticism when it comes to the various ransom demands and notes that have been made and sent to media outlets. We'll get to that, and I'll tell you more details about it when we get to the timeline here. So Savannah and her brother and sister have made pleas on social media over the course of the past few weeks, starting from just a day or so after the story broke and since then. While there have been a number of demands for ransom and letters sent to networks like TMZ and local media outlets in the Tucson area, the person or persons behind this alleged abduction has yet to provide any proof of life or had any direct communication with any of Nancy's children. And it's just made this whole thing remain at a standstill pretty much. The Associated Press published a list of the series of videos that Nancy's family have posted on social media since she disappeared. The Associated Press stated, "The family's Instagram videos have shifted in tone from impassioned pleas to whomever may have their mom, first saying they wanted to talk and that they were willing to pay a ransom, to bleaker and more desperate requests for the public's help. The latest video by Savannah Guthrie held out hope, but also acknowledged the possibility that Nancy may have already gone home to the Lord, that she loves and is dancing in heaven." So here is a timeline of the videos that the family has posted with a little bit of details about each one. I'm not going to go too deep into them because they didn't really help. So on February 4th, Savannah Guthrie acknowledged alongside her two siblings that their family was aware of media reports of a purported ransom letter and that they were ready to talk and listen, but they wanted proof that their mother was alive. They spoke directly to their mother in the video and said, "Mommy, if you're hearing this, you are a strong woman. You are God's precious daughter, Nancy," Savannah Guthrie said. On February 5th, Cameron Guthrie, on behalf of the Guthrie family, said that they had not heard anything directly from whoever took Nancy. He said that the family wanted to talk but was waiting for contact and needed a way to communicate in order to move forward. He also said that they needed proof from whoever took their mother that she was still alive. On February 7th, holding hands with her siblings, Savannah Guthrie said that they received the message and understand without providing any details. She said that they were begging for their mother to be returned to them. "We will pay," she said unequivocally. On February 9th, Savannah said that her family was at an hour of desperation and that they believed Nancy was still out there. She asked not only for prayers but for help, calling on the public to report anything that they see or hear to law enforcement. No ransom note was mentioned despite a purported deadline set for that evening. This was just another post that Savannah made on her personal Instagram. On February 10th, Savannah posted surveillance images and video released by the FBI of a masked person with what appeared to be a handgun holster at the waist. The images are from the night Nancy Guthrie went missing. The person covered a camera with a gloved hand before placing plants over it or some kind of foliage. A second post from Savannah implored that anyone with information on her mom to reach out to authorities, stating, "Someone out there recognizes this person. We believe she is still out there. Bring her home." On February 12th, Savannah posted a vintage home video of our lovely mom, in quotes. Nancy with her two children. They have flowers and they're singing, or the song is playing. I don't know if they're singing or if the song is playing in the background. "May you find a light" by The Brilliance, writing, We will never give up on her. Thank you for your prayers and hope. And the video ends with a family photo of Nancy and her 3 young children. On February 15th, noting that it had been 2 weeks since Nancy had been taken, Savannah posted a video saying that she's holding on to hope. We believe in the essential goodness of every human being, and it's never too late, she said, addressing whomever took her mother or anyone who knows where she is. On February 24th, Savannah posted a video announcing a reward of up to $1 million being offered by the family for information that leads to the recovery of Nancy. Describing the agony felt over the last 24 days, Savannah asked for continued prayers and said, "We still believe in a miracle." The family also announced a $500,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And as of the writing of this episode, I believe that there hasn't been any further social media postings by the family. There might be. I just got up this morning and I didn't really look. So if there is, my bad. We'll talk about it in the Facebook group if you want. So now let's get into the timeline of Nancy's disappearance. The last time Nancy was seen was at her home on the night of Saturday, January 31st, 2026. She had taken an Uber at 5:32 p.m. that took her to her daughter's house, Annie. They had dinner, and it was Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm sorry if it isn't. Tommaso Cioni, who took Nancy home after dinner and is the last known person to see Nancy. Tommaso was considered a person of interest shortly after the news of the kidnapping broke, but even now there's still a cloud of suspicion surrounding him, despite the fact that the sheriff's office announced 2 weeks after Nancy vanished that everyone in her family, including her son-in-law, have all been cleared and have all been nothing but cooperative. I think it's pretty easy to prove that you didn't do something, even though Tommaso was the last person to see Nancy. Most likely he went home and went to bed, and that was probably really super easy to prove. Just like technology can screw you out of committing the perfect crime, technology can also provide you with a rock solid alibi as well. And I'm going to cover a case really soon where someone was attempting to frame him for a crime, but it was pretty easy to eliminate him because of technology placing him 500 miles away from where the crime took place at the time that it happened. So technology is bad for criminals, but good for alibis. Anyway, like I said, the Guthries and all of Nancy's family have been very cooperative from the very beginning. I had even made a couple of posts on social media asking all of you what your thoughts on this whole kidnapping for ransom were, and the answers ranged from some of you still thinking that Nancy's son-in-law is still suspicious to this being some sort of retaliation related to Jeffrey Epstein, since her disappearance occurred so close in time to when the 3.5 million pages of the Epstein files were released. And there's some sort of rumors about Savannah's husband having some sort of crazy connection. Like, people are trying to connect dots where dots might not necessarily be connected, but they're trying to make things fit, you know? But right now, since we don't know who is involved or where Nancy is, and if law enforcement happen to know anything more than that, then they aren't saying it. They're not reporting things to the media. They're keeping everything pretty close to the vest. But the Guthrie children have continued to make their impassioned pleas and asking for prayers and help. And as far as anyone knows, Nancy's kids have not had any kind of direct contact with the alleged kidnappers. The ransom emails or electronic communications were sent to TMZ and some local media outlets in the Tucson area and whatnot. As far as I know, some of those have been thought to be a hoax, unrelated to this case, and various other, people who like to insert themselves into situations. But they also haven't officially confirmed the validity of, I'm sorry, I'm getting all twisted up here. We don't know if those notes are hoaxes or if they're valid, period. They are what they are. I believe that they have contained some information that is sensitive and only somebody related to this case or involved in this case would know, but I don't have all of that information. Now, I am curious as to what the notes say. I hope someday they get published. I would like to see them and read them for myself, Getting back to the timeline, so Nancy's son-in-law dropped her off at home around 9:50 p.m. Nancy was expected to be on a live stream of her church services the following morning, but she failed to show up on the stream, which caused the other service attendees to become immediately concerned. One of the members of the church reached out to Nancy's family to let them know that Nancy did not log in for the church services. So those relatives who were contacted, I don't know specifically who, but someone obviously nearby in Nancy's immediate family drove over to her home. We know that Annie lives within driving distance. Of course, Savannah lives in New York doing the Today Show. But somebody in the immediate family went over to the home to check on her. They arrived there at approximately 11 a.m. They searched the house as well as the property surrounding Nancy's house, but she was nowhere to be found. So 911 was contacted around 12 p.m. to report Nancy missing. The agency leading the investigation would be the Pima County Sheriff's Department. When authorities arrived, they did a search of the home and discovered that Nancy left behind most, if not all, of her important personal belongings, including her cell phone, her keys, her ID, and her purse, and most importantly, her essential medications. Nancy has very limited mobility. She has a pacemaker. She's dependent on those daily medications for survival. And of course, there were those blood droplets belonging to Nancy on her own porch. There is no indication at all that Nancy left on her own. Everything points to her being forcibly removed from her house. So this was considered to be more serious than simply a missing persons case from almost the very beginning. I don't know what they were thinking when they released the house. I thought maybe they figured this could have been a senior citizen that potentially wandered away, something like that. So that might be why they gave the house back to the family. They didn't realize how serious of a crime had occurred inside that home and left that trail of evidence behind on that porch. All right, so getting back to the timeline, after Nancy was dropped off at her home by her son-in-law on January 31st, her garage door closed 2 minutes later and he drove away. Then at 1:47 a.m., this would be Sunday, February 1st, 4 hours after Nancy was dropped off, her doorbell camera was disconnected by an individual wearing a ski mask and gloves. 25 minutes later at 2:12 a.m., there was motion detected on some Nest devices. I'm not quite clear on what all that means, but what I read said on February 10th, the FBI released footage recovered from a Nest camera back-end system showing an armed person messing with the doorbell. 16 minutes after that, Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from its app on Nancy's iPhone. And that was pretty much all the activity at Nancy's house until the next morning when she failed to log onto her church services live stream. And at 11 a.m., her family was contacted by a member of the church to inform them that they were concerned about her absence, and then people started showing up. 11:56 a.m. is when Nancy's family arrived to check on her and found that she was gone. At 12:03 p.m., 911 was called, and 12 minutes later, Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrived and immediately initiated a search of the home and property. At 6:46 p.m., the sheriff's office posted on social media about Nancy's disappearance. The next day, on Monday, February 2nd, 2026, authorities announced that it is their belief that Nancy was abducted. On that same day, KOLD-TV received a ransom demand payment in cryptocurrency, along with some specific deadlines. Also on February 2nd, Savannah Guthrie posted a public plea on Instagram for prayers and information. The following day, Tuesday, February 3rd, investigators discovered signs of forced entry into Nancy's home. Also, blood droplets were discovered on the front porch of Nancy's house, which were later tested and determined to be a match to her DNA. President Trump also made his first public comments on the Guthrie abduction, calling it terrible. And since then, I don't think Trump has concerned himself with the abduction. He might have reached out to Savannah. I think he gave her a phone call or whatever, but we know he's on to bigger and better things, apparently. On Wednesday, February 4th, authorities came back to the house to conduct a more thorough investigation. It is my understanding that the sheriff's office did release the home back to the family kind of prematurely. But when I go and look around for that information about it, it seems to kind of been scrubbed from my search results. I'm not sure. I do know that these agencies don't like their mistakes being all over the internet, but it does seem like it was a mistake to release the home back to the family at the time that they did, considering they didn't even find the blood on the porch. I suppose that they just didn't think that this was going to turn into what it did, this high-profile abduction with ransom notes and all this drama, and for this to still be going on a month later. But yeah, they went back to the house to conduct further investigation just to make sure they didn't miss more things. And on that same day, Savannah Guthrie posted a video addressing the kidnapper directly, requesting proof of life, and offering to communicate with whomever it is that is behind this whole thing. On Thursday, February 5th, the FBI announced a reward totaling $50,000 for information related to the abduction and/or Nancy's whereabouts or her safe return. This was also the day that the blood on the porch was confirmed to have come from Nancy. And now that I am back to talking about the blood, like I said, it was a journalist who walked up to the front door of Nancy's house after it was released to the family who noticed the blood before anyone else did. That's when authorities went back to do further investigation at the property. The family continued to make public appeals for information and prayers. And the first deadline that was given in the first ransom note sent to KOLD TV passed at 5 p.m. that day, February 5th. On Friday, February 6th, a second note or some sort of communication electronically was received by KOL TV, but the authenticity of it remained under review. A search of the neighborhood where Nancy resided was ongoing on Friday the 6th, and a collection of evidence and camera footage surrounding the area continued to be gathered. The next day, Saturday, February 7th, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, her brother and sister, posted a video together on social media where they stated that they were willing to pay for the safe return of their mom. Then, over the course of the next 2 days, going into Monday, February 9th, the search for Nancy was still ongoing. The various agencies were conducting follow-up investigations into various leads and evidence. The Guthrie family made more public appeals for information regarding Nancy's pleas and her safe return, and the second deadline that was given in the second ransom note sent to KOL TV passed that day, February 9th. So for the second time, a deadline given by the alleged kidnappers came and went, and it seems like either the deadlines aren't serious, they aren't the real abductors, or Nancy is actually no longer alive and they are unable to provide that proof of life required for the ransom to be paid. But the Guthries have said repeatedly that they've heard them, they're listening, they want to talk, and they will pay. The next significant news regarding Nancy's abduction came about on Tuesday, February 10th. This was when the images of an armed individual wearing a ski mask and gloves were released to the media. Actually, it was the whole video, but there are lots of still images that have been looked at closely in order to try and discern whatever details investigators could about what the individual had on and what he had with him. He has a gun that has a holster. He has an Ozark Trail backpack, which is commonly sold at Walmart, and it had some reflective patches on them. So that was a lead, try to find out where and who that particular backpack was sold and sold to, and if it was purchased recently. The person in the video is seen on the porch, and then he tampered with the doorbell. I don't know what he was trying to do. It looked like he was trying to put some branches or leaves to try to cover. It seems a little amateurish. We've seen criminals come around with spray paint and duct tape and the like, but I mean, that only brings about more evidence against themselves, right? Anticipating that they're going to need to obscure security cameras, but to be messing with the camera and then going back to pick up leaves and branches, it just kind of makes me think that they didn't really think of everything. You know, I think the spray paint would have been a good idea. I mean, not to give anybody ideas on how to conceal themselves from being captured on surveillance, but we've seen it, right? Anyway, when the investigators released those videos and images, Savannah posted those on her social media accounts. The following day, on Wednesday, February 11th, investigators discovered a pair of discarded gloves near Nancy's home as the search of the areas surrounding Nancy's house continued. However, DNA testing revealed that the gloves belonged to a local restaurant worker and have been determined to not be involved in the investigation. That development came about during the first week of March. I mean, the DNA results were reported, I want to say on March 4th or 5th. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of the timeline here, but I wanted to just put that out there and not leave you in suspense. Those gloves are not related to the case. They didn't belong to anybody but somebody who I guess was littering, apparently. The next day, on Thursday, February 12th, the FBI upped the reward from $50,000 to $100,000 and also released a description of the individual captured on Nancy's Ring doorbell as being male, average build, standing about 5'10", and wearing a 25-liter backpack. That's the first time I've seen a backpack described by its actual capacity. I didn't even know you could get that information from video footage like this, but I'm not like a genius with doing math and calculus and all that to try to measure dimensions and space and all that, especially in a grainy video footage. I mean, that's pretty good math there. So on this day also, residents within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's house were asked to check their surveillance footage for anything suspicious that they might have captured and to share that information with law enforcement if they find anything. On February 13th, the FBI and the SWAT units were active about 2 miles from Nancy's house. That information came from aerial images, maybe images from some drones. 2 locations were quote-unquote swarmed by forensic teams and investigators, but there is no report of anything found or anyone of any interest being identified. 2 days later, on February 15th, Savannah posted a new video to whomever has Nancy or knows where she is, imploring them for Nancy's return and that it's never too late to do the right thing. On February 16th, the Pima County Sheriffs released a statement to the media indicating that every member of Nancy's family has been thoroughly investigated and cleared as potential suspects, and for anybody or any media outlet to continue to suggest otherwise is cruel and wrong. There has been this kind of, like I said, a cloud of suspicion hanging over Nancy's son-in-law, Annie's husband, the one that dropped her off the night before she disappeared, and that's just purely based on the fact that he dropped her off, making him the last known person to have seen her alive. So over the course of February 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th, the investigation continued on with no major movement in the case. The Pima County Sheriff's deputies and officers were seen on the 17th gathering at Nancy's house. That was the day they made the announcement about the DNA on those gloves that turned out to not be related. The DNA was not in any database. And like I said, they probably did further investigation. Probably since they tracked down the actual restaurant worker, they probably used the genetic genealogy to find him. And he's not connected, as I just mentioned a moment ago. But all of that started going down around the 17th, so in the middle of the month. The investigation then began to try to focus on Nancy's pacemaker, as well as the backpack and the gun holster that the suspect had, as seen on the Ring doorbell footage. During this time, the Pima County Sheriffs asked that any information about the case that might be useful in finding her are the only calls that should be made into their tip lines. The tip line, which had been inundated with thousands and thousands of calls since all of this started, were also including calls from people wanting to send their prayers and their well wishes or they're leaving messages with their own theories and a lot of conjecture about what may have happened. And the sheriff has asked for people to stop making those types of calls. They really want to limit the calls to the tip line to serious tips only, because it just utilizes resources that can be better spent on actually looking for Nancy. On February 24th, Savannah posted a video announcing the $1 million reward for information leading to her recovery, saying that even though she and her family still believe that a miracle is possible, they are also very well aware that she may no longer be with them and that she may already be gone. And I really, really don't like watching Savannah's videos. It's just the fear and the trauma and the heartbreak is so written all over her face. But I watch them anyway. Savannah, I don't watch her on the Today Show, and I'm not going to start because I don't even have TV access to the show. I would have to watch reels and clips when she does come back. That's probably the only way I'm going to see it. But it's really heartbreaking to see her in this capacity, Savannah also announced that the family has made a $50,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A couple of days later, on February 26th, a memorial outside Nancy's home with prayers and calls for her return appeared with her picture, flowers, and notes. On that same day, unfortunately, with no further information coming about regarding Nancy and her disappearance going into the fourth week of this, media outlets began reporting that the FBI was going to scale back the number of agents working on Nancy's disappearance in the city of Tucson and are going back to their headquarters in Phoenix. And the very next day, the Pima County Sheriff's Office announced that while it's having to refocus their resources onto other things, that they are not giving up on their search for Nancy, stating, quote, "This remains an active investigation and will continue until Nancy Guthrie is located or all leads have been exhausted." And as I am writing this, I wrote this on March 5th. It was the day before, on March 4th, that the DNA found on those gloves turned out to belong to that restaurant worker, and he was eliminated. Those gloves were eliminated, had nothing to do with the case, and did not get anybody any closer to figuring out where in the world is Nancy Guthrie. So one of the more intriguing aspects of this case, for me anyway, are those ransom communications, the notes. When I heard that TMZ and other media outlets received ransom notes, I was surprised because that's kind of not a thing anymore. Gone are the days of the newspaper and magazine letter cutouts. Of course, these were sent by email or some other electronic means. It's like the only thing cutout letters are used for now are fonts or crafts on Etsy or Pinterest, or if you host a podcast and decide to call it My Favorite Murder, you might choose a font like that. So as of the writing of this episode, the authenticity of the ransom notes related to the Guthrie abduction have not been officially verified. They haven't really been called a hoax. As far as I know, they have not been written off yet as hoaxes. But let's talk briefly about these ransom notes. As of the writing of this episode, there have been at least 5 ransom notes or messages reported in Nancy's case that contain varying demands and levels of detail. The first ransom note was sent to TMZ and other news outlets in Tucson. It demanded millions of dollars in the form of Bitcoin in exchange for Nancy's safe return. The note included details about her Apple Watch as well as a floodlight in her home that was broken or damaged. These details were not things known to the general public. Those would be details only known to those responsible for Nancy's disappearance, as it is suggested that the author of the note had knowledge of the home and the scene of the abduction. There were 2 deadlines set in that first note, one for 5 p.m. that upcoming Thursday following the abduction, that would have been February 5th. The second deadline was set the following Monday. That would have been February 9th. Included were threats of serious consequences to come if their demands for Bitcoin were not met. The second message was received by KOLD TV News 13. It was another note, and it was received on Friday, February 6th, just before noon local time there in Arizona. However, this note did not contain any new demands, nor did it contain proof of life. It did originate from a different IP address, but a similar cloaking software as the first note was used. So investigators were going to examine the messages to determine whether or not they came from the same sender as the first one. Because they used the similar or the same cloaking software, it is likely that they were the same. They're using IP addresses. They could just be going from place to place. You use a different IP address everywhere you go. The third note, which was reported by TMZ and other local media outlets, made a request for 1 Bitcoin in exchange for information about the alleged kidnapper or kidnappers. And as I was writing this, 1 Bitcoin was worth or is worth a little over $68,000. This note also said that previous attempts to contact Savannah Guthrie and her brother and sister were attempted but were unsuccessful. Now, I've been under the impression that Savannah, Annie, and Cameron Guthrie have all been very clear that they are willing and eager to speak to the kidnappers. Of course, they want to do anything to get their mom back safely, but at the same time, there very well might be obstacles to getting there to have that communication actually happen. There's always a risk of being traced. And when I wrote that, I immediately had visions of the old days when you needed to keep the kidnapper on the phone for as long as possible while the FBI traced the call. Remember that? And they'd sit there with a little recorder. They'd be all in your kitchen waiting for phone calls to come in. Yeah, those were the days, right? The fourth note or message was received or at least obtained by TMZ on Monday, February 16th. And in this communication, the person who sent it claimed that they had seen Nancy, quote, 5 days ago south of the border, unquote. The message also used the same Bitcoin account as the previous notes. And the fifth note was received 2 days later on February 18th, and in it, the sender demanded to be paid in a different cryptocurrency than Bitcoin. Investigators described the note as much more graphic and sophisticated. What that means, I don't know, because there aren't a whole lot of details about the notes other than what AI comes up with when you Google and the various articles beneath that. And it isn't making a whole lot of sense to me, but if you want to know what AI told me, it said that the note, quote, involved conditional triggers, media instructions, and implied proof of life without explicitly stating it. Because of the weird, disjointed information out there about the ransom notes, I'm not going to go too much further into it beyond this unless I see something that feels legitimate and confirmed. The one thing we do know is that the Guthrie children have said that they will pay. It's up to the kidnappers, I guess, to decide if they're going to put everything on the line in order to collect. It was reported on February 8th that the amount being demanded of the Guthrie family or for Nancy's safe return was $6 million. So, as of the writing and recording of this episode, Dreamers, there has been virtually no movement on the case whatsoever. And whatever is going on with the official investigation into Nancy's disappearance, like I said, they're keeping it close to the vest. So there could be movement on the case and we just don't know about it. As of March 5th, Savannah made the difficult decision to leave Arizona and head back to New York. Newsweek reported that she visited some of her NBC colleagues, but they also reported that some there at NBC were hoping that she would never come back. Yeah, because that opens up a very coveted spot as anchor of the main hour of the Today Show, right? And that means promotions and raises that trickle down to a lot of people because when somebody gets promoted, they bring their whole staff with them, right? Not that that's the main thing that people at NBC are concerning themselves with, but I mean, come on. Every time there's a dust up at these nationally syndicated shows, there's always speculation as to who's going to be named as their successor. But it seems as though Savannah has no intentions of leaving, Even though I don't think she has stated anything about it publicly, that is just according to reports and sources. So the Newsweek article said, quote, on Thursday, March 5th, a spokesperson for the morning show said that the 54-year-old anchor plans to return to the network at some point, even though her focus remains on the ongoing search for her missing 84-year-old mother, Nancy. According to a Friday, March 6th report in the Daily Mail, multiple sources claimed that some staffers were frustrated when bosses revealed that Savannah planned to eventually get back to work. Quote, it's a viper's nest, one source told the outlet, even if you're suffering. Savannah has been absent from today since Nancy was reported missing February 1st by family members. The Mail sources claim that the production staffers were more relaxed throughout that time and preferred Hoda Kotb, who has filled in for her former colleague. Quote, you think the morning show is bad? That's nothing, one source said. These people will steal your chair while you're still sitting in it. From the hair and makeup people to the producers, you can't trust anyone. They all talk, unquote. Okay, I guess maybe who's getting Savannah's chair is the main thing people at NBC are concerning themselves with. So much for me giving the people over there the benefit of the doubt, especially in these trying times. You'd think people would stop the pettiness for a moment and just let this woman who's going through it go through it, you know? But anyway, the article continued. While the sources have made it clear that everyone is hoping for Nancy's safe return amid this tragic time, well, that's nice of them, right? Some staff hoped that they would learn more about their future with the morning program, and certain people even thought about how they could secure more screen time. So yeah, I mean, I get it, but still, you'd think that in this day and age, people would learn to keep their mouths shut, stay quiet, and observe. But then again, I'm just as guilty of being petty and gossipy too. So I'm not one to talk. If I was a hair and makeup person, oh, child, I would be all up in everybody's business. Anyway, as much as I would like to have more to talk about regarding Nancy Guthrie, sadly, there isn't much else to say. I do know that Savannah went back and said hi to her friends or her colleagues over at NBC, and it was a photo op, people giving hugs and shedding tears, all that mess. But that happened. She's back in New York. I don't know when she's going to be back on TV. She might be back on this morning. I doubt it. I think I would have heard about it, but I literally haven't checked. I got up, got my stuff together, and sat down to record. So, with that being said, I will close with this. People with any information regarding this case are asked to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-225-5324. You may also contact your local FBI office, the nearest American embassy or consulate, or you can submit a tip online at tips.fi.gov. And that is all I have for today, dreamers. I want to thank you all so much for, again, your support on social media. It really made me feel a lot better. I wouldn't have this type of energy and be in this great of a mood this morning on a Monday morning if it wasn't for all of you and all of your comments. I told you something very deeply personal that's been happening in my life. I shared it with you. I've been kind of keeping it to myself for several months. I've lost a really good friend over this because he just can't be associated with somebody who is having their livelihood and their reputation attacked. And I understood that, but I wish things were different. Anyway, that's all I have. I want to thank you again so much for everything that you've done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the downloads. Please come on to Facebook. I'm trying to be more active on there. Follow the show. Follow my oil shop too. If you're in Vegas, come by. I've had at least one listener come by. I've had somebody else stop in and I wasn't there and I missed them. If you're going to come to Vegas, come through. Come for an oil change. If you need it, if you drive here, I will take care of you. You know me, I take care of your crime fix, and now I can take care of your car too. I am going back to California this weekend just to visit with my daughter. Spring break is starting, so I'm going to take a little short, it's not really a vacation, but just to say hi, just to be back in California. I miss it there, but I am enjoying being here. I'm enjoying my business, and of course, I'm always enjoying making the show for all of you. Thank you again so much, and as always, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.